have our little reveal. So, what nerve supplies the teeth and periodontum? The trigeminal nerve. Trigeminal is made up of mandibular, maxillary, and I think it's infraorbital. I can't remember. But trigeminal supplies the teeth and periodontum. And remember, the branches of the trigeminal are PSA, MSA, ASA, IA. Blood supply is maxillary artery. Blood supply to teeth, periodontum, maxillary artery. And then the lymph system is submandibular. Okay, so you have epithelium and you have connective tissue. Epithelial tissue contains no blood vessels. It's blood vessels. It's nourished from underlying connective tissue. The top layer, epithelial, is keratinized and it does not have a nucleus. And the bottom layer does have a nucleus. So, epithelial tissue, it makes up the outer surface of the body, which is our skin, mouth, stomach, and intestines. And we know it's characterized by plentiful cells and sparse extracellular matrix. So, if you look at our jello, our fruit suspended in our jello, epithelial tissue has a lot of fruit and a little bit of jello. Okay. Keratinized epithelial cells. Keratinized is tough, resistant, and waterproof. It has no nuclei. It's not very cushiony. And keratinized epithelial cells are found in the stratum corneum layer. So think corneum keratinized. Then you have non-keratinized, and these do have a nucleus, and they act as a cushion and against wear and tear. Non-keratinized is softer and more flexible, such as in the lining of our cheeks. Okay, now let's talk about epithelial cells and how they join others. So you have cell-to-cell junction, which is desmosomes, and cell-to-basal lamina junction, which is hemidesmosomes. I remember this like desmosome. It starts with a D, and so does dude. So if the cells are like, hey dude, I want to stand next to you. Desmosomes, dude, I want to stand next to you. Cells want to stand next to each other so they connect. Cell-to-cell connection. This is found a lot in the gingival epithelium. And then you have hemidesmosomes, which connect to the basal lamina. Okay, let's see. We talked about extracellular matrix, which again is just our jello and our jello salad. It's a gel-like substance that has protein fibers that surround those cells. So then we talked about epithelial tissue. Let's talk about connective tissue. Connective tissue fills the spaces between tissues and organs. It has a little bit of cells and a lot of extracellular tissue. So, going back to our jello analogy, connective tissue doesn't have a lot of fruit. It's mostly made up of jello. It has fiber-filled for strength, and it has a lot of blood supply and provides structure and support. Connective tissue is a lot like the scaffolding of buildings. It provides structure and support underneath. Types of connective tissue, we have cartilage, bone, tonsils, lymph, fat, and all dental tissues except one. What's the one? Enamel. And blood. But connective tissue in the mouth is cementum, dentin, pulp. What's enamel though? Enamel is not connective tissue. Enamel is epithelial tissue. That's important to remember. Okay, so how do epithelial and connective tissues meet? Well, they can meet in a wavy way or in a smooth way. Most areas in which they meet are wavy, and this is good because wavy boundaries enhance adhesion by increasing the surface area. And when they increase the surface area, it increases the opportunity for the cells to receive nourishment. Because remember, epithelial cells get their nourishment from the connective tissue underneath them. So this is the way they get their nourishment. The benefits of having a wavy border is more surface connection, increased flexibility, and again, more opportunity for nourishment and blood supply. If you have a straight boundary, you have less of all those things. The names of these wavy boundaries are epithelial ridges, which are extensions of the epithelium into the connective tissue, also called retipes or whatever. And then you have connective tissue papillae, which are finger-like extensions of connective tissue that extend into the epithelium. So basically you're just calling one side of the wavy line something and the other side a different name. Okay, so just a quick summary. Epithelial tissue versus connective tissue. Epithelial tissue, many cells, many fruit in the jello. Connective tissue, few cells, not very much fruit. Epithelial tissue, very little extracellular matrix. So epithelial is a lot of fruit and very little jello. Connective tissue is very little fruit and a lot of jello. Does epithelial tissue have blood supply? No. What is an example of epithelial tissue? Enamel. Perfect. Now, connective tissue, does that have a blood supply? Yes, because remember, the epithelial tissue gets its blood supply from the connective tissue. What's an example of connective tissue? Dentin, cementum, and pulp. Alright. Now let's talk about our gingival connective tissue. So, gingival connective tissue attaches gingiva to the cementum of the root and the alveolar bone. It provides stability, and it has an abundant extracellular matrix. What makes up most of gingival connective tissue? Protein fibers. Protein fibers make up 55 to 65%. Supragingival fiber groups. So the supragroups are the fiber groups that are located supra or above the bone, and that's how they get their name. These are the first to break down during an infection. What are the first? The supragingival fiber groups. And once they break down, it's important to remember they do not come back. What's the function of fiber bundles? What do fiber bundles do? They brace free gingiva against the tooth. They reinforce attachment of the junctional epithelium to the tooth. They provide rigidity and withstanding of chewing. They unite free gingiva with cementum and connect adjacent teeth together. Okay, let's see. Then you have all your gingival fiber groups. You have dentogingival, which connects the tooth to the gingiva. You have periostogingival, which connects the periosteum to the gingiva. You have circular fibers, which encircle the tooth. You have dentoperiosteal, which is again tooth connecting to periosteum. And alveolo-gingival, which is bone connecting to the gingiva. More examples of the gingival fiber groups. Okay, you have a PDL. What is your PDL? A PDL is a thin sheet of fibrous connective tissue located between the tooth and its bony socket. PDL holds the tooth in the socket. It acts as a shock absorber, and it's radiolucent on an X-ray. Important to remember, Sharpie's fibers, what do? They connect cementum to alveolar bone. Okay, let's talk about the different periodontal fiber groups. There's 5 of them. You have alveolar crest fibers, which connect the alveolar crest to the cementum. You have horizontal fibers, which connect the middle root of the bone of the tooth to the gingiva, and then they meet the tooth at a right angle. You have interradicular fibers, which join cementum to bone only between the roots of multi-rooted teeth, and oblique fibers, which go obliquely from the apical third of the root to occlusal surface. And these are the most plentiful. That's important to remember. Which fiber group is most plentiful? Oblique, oblique, oblique. Apical fibers are from the root of the tooth, the apex, to the bone. So if you ever get stuck on these fiber groups, just think of their name. Their name basically gives away where they are. Components of the PDL, what makes it up? Cells, fibroblasts, cementoblasts, and osteoblasts. Extracellular matrix, blood vessels, and nerve supply. What can cause a widening of the PDL? Bruxing or trauma of the teeth. So again, reviewing, what does the PDL do? It's supportive. It gives suspension and shock absorbing. It's sensory. We have our pain, pressure, proprioception from it. It's nutritive. It has a blood supply and it gives it to the rest of the periosteum. It's formative, which means it forms cementoblasts and osteoblasts, which create cementum and bone. And it resorbs things, such as osteoclasts that resorb bone and cementum. Okay. PDL space. It varies in everybody, but the average width is 0.25 millimeters. If you have lots of occlusal loads like bruxing, you have a wider space. If the teeth don't come in contact and don't touch, you have a thinner space. Cementum. Cementum is calcified connective tissue on the root. The PDL ligament holds the tooth in the bony socket of the alveolar bone. What does cementum do? Cementum seals and covers up dentinal tubules. It protects the dentin. It attaches fibers to the teeth. It forms at the apical roots of the teeth to compensate for the loss of the tooth tissue caused by attrition. What makes up cementum? You have organic matrix, which are dense packed collagen fibers in a gel, mineralized portion, and no blood vessels or nerves in cementum. Two different types of cementum: acellular, which is absent in the building of cementum. So acellular contains no cementocytes. It's the first to be formed, because remember it starts with an A, first to be formed. Covers the coronal third of the half of the root. It's not produced during the life of the tooth. So acellular is absent in the building process. It's not occurring during the life of the tooth. And it consists mostly of Sharpie's fibers. So that's acellular, and then you have cellular, which cellular cementum continues. It builds throughout a lifetime. Continues to form after tooth eruption and does contain cementocytes. CEJ, cemento-enamel junction. How does cementum and enamel come together? Three different ways: overlapping, meeting, and gap. Overlapping means cementum overlaps enamel. Meeting means cementum meets enamel perfectly. And gap means there's a space. And then we have the alveolar bone, which is made up of alveolar bone proper, trabecular bone, and compact bone. Basically, alveolar bone is mineralized connective tissue made by osteoblasts. It's rigid, it has blood vessels and nerves, and undergoes periods of formation and resorption. And yeah, that is chapters 1 and 2 for perio.